The title I created for this talk is The BBC in Turmoil, Can It Restore Trust? But I didn't create it for this audience. I created it for an audience of 60 vicars and bishops at the Groucho Club. In September 2012, the BBC was riding high. Its coverage of the London Olympics had been widely praised, and so had its dramas, from Sherlock and Call the Midwife to the Shakespeare season, The Hollow Crown. But within weeks, the BBC was in crisis because of events triggered by the death of Jimmy Savile. The fallout over 2 Newsnight investigations into child abuse damaged trust in the BBC's journalism, its management and its governance, and it led to the resignation of the new Director General after just 54 days in the job. The large payoff to George Entwistle was fiercely criticised by MPs on the Public Accounts Committee, and so reignited the controversy over high executive pay of the corporation. And the issue of sexual abuse is still making headlines as other high-profile performers are prosecuted. People have often asked me, isn't it difficult covering stories about their own organisation? One battle-hardened BBC correspondent told me, "I wouldn't do your job for the world." I tried to explain it wasn't that hard, provided you treated the BBC like any other organisation, striving to be accurate and balanced, and never referring to it as we. But you have to report on your bosses, he said. And indeed that is true. Not only report on them, doorstep them when they're in trouble. So there was one magic moment when John Burt, you may remember, it was called Armani Gate. It turned out he wasn't on the staff, he was being paid as a freelance, and he was charging his Armani suits to the BBC, and it became a big scandal. He went away for a few days, came back, and we knew that there was going to be, the press were going to be outside Broadcasting House, and there would be a photo call. And I was there with a microphone and a TV camera and a media scrum, and those media scrums are always chaos, because everybody wants to get close to the person, ask a proper question, and make sure you can hear the answer. And we thought he was just going to stop and take and be photographed. And he got out the car, raced to the doors, and we thought, hang on, we've been misled here. He's just going to go in, and we're not going to get either an interview or a photo. So we all rushed after him, and I was brandishing this microphone. And the only question you need to ask in those circumstances as a BBC correspondent of your own boss is, are you going to resign, Mr. Burt? Listen to anybody, I mean, it's the same with politicians, anybody who's going into number 10 and so on, it's always, are you going to resign? So I did that, raced up to him, and then it turned out that all he was doing was going to stand next to the BBC logo on the door. So it had all been a huge, great scrum for nothing. But when the broadcast went out on the 1 o'clock news, and you could clearly hear, "Are you going to resign, Mr. Burt?" the newsroom erupted in cheers. For me, the biggest pressure was simply getting the story right and on the air fast, on as many BBC outlets as needed. And as a specialist correspondent, and for the past 10 years the only media correspondent, I reported round the clock for the national daily news bulletins and sequence programmes on radio, television and online. Now other BBC journalists have different pressures. They're covering stories for programmes such as Panorama and The Media Show, and they only have a single weekly deadline, but they only have half an hour in which to deal with the subject. So again, different pressures and different journalists with different things that they have to do. But getting it right and on the air fast has inevitably become much more demanding since the arrival of 24-hour news and the internet. There are more BBC outlets to serve, there are shorter deadlines, more competitors. Twitter has become a news feed in its own right, acting as a clearinghouse for media owners to trumpet their breaking stories amid the gossip, the jokes, the half-truths, and the occasional libels tweeted by others. As media correspondent, you don't want major news about the corporation to break on a rival media outlet. And that's not easy to ensure when the BBC remains as leaky as it does, and when, with the best of motives, it declines to confirm the story publicly until it has informed its own staff. which can mean, ironically, that they actually hear it from Twitter or a rival broadcaster or a newspaper because of the leak. And you also don't want to get the BBC story wrong. That sometimes means waiting for confirmation or more details when the corporation's competitors may be happy to fly kites or to take a particular line. And programme editors find it very frustrating when the correspondent says they cannot confirm a story that's running on another media outlet, and they'll try to put you on air straight away. Their parameter is to get you on the air straight away. They don't care if you make a fool of yourself, they have got the person on the air. As the correspondent, you do not want to be on the air making a fool of yourself, getting it wrong. Never wrong for long is not an acceptable philosophy for the BBC, especially about its own affairs, and that is a phrase that people use about Sky. Because in the age of breaking news and rolling news, you can correct things very quickly. The problem is, if you got it wrong on your own airwaves, if the BBC does it, no one ever will let them forget it. If Sky does it, people don't really care. On the 17th of September 2012, when George Entwistle became Director General, the BBC was basking in widespread praise for its extensive, groundbreaking coverage of the London Olympics and the proms, and dramas such as Sherlock, The Hollow Crown, and Parade's End. 2 months later, when the Director General had been paid off with twice his legal entitlement, the corporation looked accident-prone, incompetent, and careless with licence payers' cash. The BBC, I think, was fortunate that Tony Hall was prepared to take on the challenge. One former senior executive had texted him saying, "This is your Lord Kitchener moment. The BBC needs you." Had Tony not stepped forward, I'm not sure anyone else had the range of experience and above all the credibility to restore the BBC's reputation and prepare it for its next charter and licence fee settlement. Tim Davie did a good job as interim Director General, steadying the ship and demonstrating the management skills that George Entwistle so patently lacked. But he didn't have the credibility. Lord Hall's experience as a former editor and director of BBC News and a successful chief executive of the Royal Opera House put him head and shoulders above any competition that might have come forward. So I think Lord Hall is the right leader for the BBC, and I think he's made a good start. I wrote this at the turn of the year, and I still think, you may have questions, but I still think he's made a good start. He's announced plans to boost the arts and music output, and we heard more about that yesterday, to enhance the iPlayer, to improve access to more intellectual radio programmes, and to treat licence players like owners, not just users of the BBC. But that doesn't make the job any easier, and several severe problems remain. None in itself amounts to a crisis, but together they could still cause real damage to the corporation. So Jimmy Savile's legacy. At the time of writing, Dame Janet Smith's review of the cultural practices of the BBC has yet to be published, but there can be little doubt that it will cause further damage to the BBC's reputation. The review has interviewed 140 witnesses and noted telephone calls with more than 340. And though it deals with the past, its findings could have legal ramifications which rumble on for years and which highlight continuing flaws in the BBC's current workplace practices. The director of BBC News, James Harding, who came from the Times, has hired people from other news organisations, and so does the editor of Newsnight. Trust in the BBC has started to return, but the Savile Newsnight crisis demonstrated real flaws in the editorial management structure of the BBC News division. Does it need unpicking, as some have suggested, or are there greater strengths in having a unified BBC News structure? Executive pay and payoffs. BBC executives weren't always well paid, which is one reason the corporation offered a generous pension scheme. I actually took a pay cut to join the BBC in 1989, and my income has fallen further more than once as the spending cut started to bite. But for managers, it's been a different story, as we know, and I wouldn't try to defend what has happened there. Some blame the much higher pay packets of commercial broadcasters. Whatever the reason, high pay, in the words of Lord Patton, became a toxic issue, and it's still not being resolved. Budget cuts, the BBC is still having to cut its costs because the licence fee was frozen and the BBC was given more responsibilities. It's about to take on the World Service, paying for that. It's taken on S4C, the Welsh Fourth Channel. It it's a broadband and so on. So again, that is going to be a difficult one. And yet, despite all these problems, the BBC's programmes, both on radio and television, and in the mobile and digital arena, remain enormously popular and much admired, and so does its website. Indeed, the BBC is accused by its commercial rivals of being too popular and powerful, not too weak. It's as if the BBC's management failings occur in a parallel universe from its output. The Times put it well in a leader. The eternal mystery of the BBC is how an organisation that works so badly can work so well. As impressive a journalistic organisation as any, it is nonetheless a managerial basket case. And when the spotlight shines on its internal workings, it diminishes in popular stature, and it deserves to. So I don't believe the BBC is currently in crisis. It's plenty of goodwill in the bank, as long as Strictly Come Dancing, Sherlock, Doctor Who, British Bake Off, Call the Midwife, and that's to name only the popular drama and entertainment programmes. Not arts and all the intellectual stuff. As long as they're winning audiences and acclaim, when Radio 4 is attracting its highest ever listening figures, and when the licence fee provides as much value as it does to millions of people for 40 pence a day. But Tony Hall and his team have to tackle its problems. They have to embrace real change and build a clear new strategy for the BBC if it's to win the public's confidence for the next 10 years of licence fee.